Welcome to True Tears Stories. Please like this video and subscribe to True Tears Stories. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. Harold's hand hovers over the mouse as the wedding photo loaded. He hadn't been tagged in the image, just as he hadn't been tagged in her life for years. But there she was, his daughter, Emily, in white lace and candlelight, smiling into a future he wasn't part of. He read the caption 3 times before it sank in. Yesterday was the best day of my life. I married my best friend. Forever starts now. No mention of a father walking her down the aisle. No mention of a father at all. The last time they had spoken was 4 years ago, or maybe 5. It had been a stilted phone call, the kind that felt like both sides were standing in separate soundproof booths, mouthing words at each other, but never quite connecting. She had asked him not to call anymore, said it was too complicated, said he didn't understand. And Harold, who had spent a lifetime trying not to make things worse, had simply replied, "Okay." But this silent omission cut deeper than words ever could. He stared at the photo longer than he should have. The backdrop looked like the vineyard she'd once said she wanted to visit in college. He remembered her describing it in detail, eyes bright, hands animated. She'd wanted to go with him, back when they still took weekend trips and shared inside jokes about bad hotel breakfasts. But that was before the divorce, before her mother began rewriting the narrative, one small comment at a time, before Dad became Harold in every sentence she said. He hadn't contested custody, hadn't fought dirty. He thought being the calm parent, the stable one, would win out eventually. That truth would settle in over time, like dust revealing the shape of something long hidden. He was wrong. Harold set his coffee down, untouched, and opened the drawer where he kept old birthday cards and school drawings. Emily's crayon handwriting stared back at him from a folded construction paper heart. To the best daddy ever. He closed it gently and exhaled through his nose. This wasn't about revenge. He wasn't interested in ruining her wedding. But he couldn't pretend this didn't hurt. He couldn't pretend he didn't exist. He thought of sending a message, just a text, something simple, like congratulations. But even that felt hollow. Too little, too late. Instead, he sat with the silence. Not just the absence of an invitation, but the decades of diminishing presence. The years spent watching from the sidelines, being the name she never said at graduation. The photo cropped out of the family frame. Harold wasn't impulsive. He didn't throw fits or make grand gestures, but he believed in truth. And as he sat there, the glow of the wedding image burning into his mind, a strange calm settled over him. There was something he needed to send, not to punish her, but to remind her of where she came from, of what she'd forgotten, or maybe been made to forget. It took him a few days to find it, buried in a box in the attic, where he kept the few things his ex-wife hadn't claimed during the split, wrapped in tissue, protected in a flat cedar box he had once carved himself, back when woodworking was more than just a hobby. Inside was the necklace. He had given it to Emily when she turned 16. It wasn't expensive, but it was meaningful. A gold pendant with a tiny photo of the two of them on the beach, laughing with their faces turned into the wind. Her curls had been wild that day. Sand stuck to her nose. She had told him it was the best day of her life. Harold had watched her wear it for months after, until one summer she came back from her mother's with a new chain, and never wore the pendant again. He'd kept it, quietly, like everything else. Now he placed it back in the cedar box, along with a short note written in careful handwriting. I wasn't there to walk you down the aisle, but I was there for every step before. In case you forgot, this is who we were. Love, Dad. He addressed the package to the venue. He'd found it listed in the bridal registry, another silent detail not meant for him, but easily discovered, and paid for overnight delivery. Then he waited, not for a reply, not for forgiveness, but for acknowledgement, something, anything. When the delivery receipt pinged on his phone the next morning, he stared at it for a long while. The small green check mark didn't carry satisfaction, just stillness, like the last line of a letter never meant to be answered. He spent the day like any other, read the paper, refilled the bird feeder, walked the loop near the lake where he used to push Emily on her scooter. The air was crisp, the sky flat gray, perfect for thinking, or for letting thoughts go. Later that evening, his phone buzzed. It was a number he didn't recognize. He didn't answer. He let it ring, then went upstairs, sat at his desk, and opened the old scrapbook Emily had once made for him on Father's Day. The pages still smelled faintly of glue sticks and lemon-scented markers. On the last page was a photo of the two of them in front of her middle school. She was grinning, missing 2 teeth. He had his arm around her, pride etched into every line of his face. Underneath, in blocky handwriting, "Best dad ever, no matter what." Harold ran a finger along the words and let the phone go to voicemail again. The next morning, Harold didn't check his voicemail. He made eggs, buttered toast, and let the morning sun stretch across the kitchen floor as if nothing had changed. But something had. The house, once just quiet, now felt weighty, like it knew he'd done something that couldn't be taken back. He wasn't sure what he expected. Not a thank you, certainly, and not anger either. If Emily had opened the box, if she had read the note, then she had felt something. That much, Harold believed. Whether it was guilt or confusion, he couldn't say. He spent the afternoon rearranging books in his study, a small habit that always helped him think. The books he kept weren't for show. Most were underlined, dog-eared, even stained with coffee. He paused on a copy of The Little Prince. Emily had given it to him when she was 9. Inside, her handwriting slanted with effort, so you don't forget how to be gentle. He set the book down. By the time the sun dipped low, Harold had checked his phone 3 times. Still no voicemail played, just the same unknown number, twice. No text, no email, just silence. It was strange, he thought, how the absence of a reply could feel so loud. On the 3rd day, a letter arrived, not in Emily's handwriting, not even on her stationery. It was a plain envelope, hand-addressed in block letters, with no return address. The kind of envelope that gave away nothing and promised even less. Inside was a folded piece of hotel paper. The note was short. "You shouldn't have sent that. You had no right. Greg, the groom." Harold read the name slowly, aloud to the empty room. He didn't know much about the man, had never met him. What little he did know came from the internet. Marketing executive, avid runner, lover of luxury watches. The kind of man who smiled with his whole mouth but not his eyes. So he had opened the box. Not Emily. Of course. Harold folded the note and placed it on the counter. He poured himself a glass of water, then stood at the sink, staring out at the backyard. A squirrel darted across the patio stones, and the wind moved through the tall grass like a whispered warning. It wasn't anger that filled him. It was a familiar ache, being intercepted, filtered, misunderstood. Even in this small gesture, Emily had been shielded. Or maybe Greg had taken it upon himself to do the shielding. But either way, the message had landed, and that was enough. He didn't reply. Instead, he began a new letter. Not to Greg, not even to Emily, technically. It was addressed to the girl who once called me her anchor. He didn't plan to send it, not yet, but the act of writing was something. A way to put the weight down, if only for a while. He wrote about her third-grade science fair, when she'd burst into tears because her volcano wouldn't erupt and he had sat on the gym floor with her for 2 hours, mixing baking soda and vinegar until they got it right. He wrote about the road trip to Vermont, when she got carsick 5 minutes in and they had to turn back, but still stopped for maple candy because she wanted it so badly. He wrote about the year after the divorce, the way she used to hug him tightly at drop-off, then glance back with unsure eyes, waiting to see if he would wave. He always did. He didn't blame her for forgetting, not exactly, but he wanted her to remember, not the gift, not the necklace, him. Later that week, a second envelope arrived. This time, it was in Emily's handwriting. The return address was hers, the real one. Not the city apartment she used for forwarding mail, but the condo they had once driven past and called Too Beige. He opened it with more care than he expected. Inside was a single sentence. I didn't know what was in the box. No greeting, no explanation, but no blame either. Harold read it twice, then again. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't cold. If anything, it read like someone unsure of the language required for this kind of moment. He sat with the note in his lap, the house humming faintly around him, as if even the walls were waiting for what he would do next. He didn't write back. Not yet. Instead, he boxed up the scrapbook, the pendant, and the old photo albums. Not to throw away, not to forget, but because he needed space. Not to erase the past, but to stop trying to force it into the present. That weekend, he drove out to the cabin, the one he'd built after retirement, tucked between a lake and a patch of stubborn pines. He hadn't been in months. The porch was dusted with leaves, the windows cloudy with neglect. But the air was clean, untouched. He unpacked slowly, made coffee, built a fire, and then, for the first time in years, he slept without dreaming. The following week passed like a held breath. The silence wasn't heavy. It was deliberate, almost respectful. Harold didn't expect another letter, and none came. He didn't check Emily's social media, didn't call mutual friends. He let the stillness stretch, not as punishment, but as space. At the cabin, the days settled into rhythm. Early mornings with coffee and mist lifting off the lake. Quiet afternoons with books he'd started years ago and never finished. Evenings beside the fire with only the crackle of pine wood for company. He let himself feel small out there, not diminished, but resized. It was peaceful, being unnecessary. Then, on a Wednesday morning, a car pulled up. He heard the tires on gravel before he saw her, Emily. She stood outside the car for a long moment, arms folded, shoulders hunched like she hadn't expected the cabin to look so much like the pictures she barely remembered. She didn't bring a bag, no dramatic entrance, just a girl, now a woman, squinting through sunlight at a place she had once called home. Harold didn't move at first. He stood in the doorway, one hand on the screen door's worn frame, watching her. She looked thinner than he remembered, tired around the eyes. But she wasn't crying. She looked determined. He stepped outside. "Did you come alone?" he asked. She nodded. "I wasn't sure if you'd be here. I wasn't sure you'd remember how to find it." She glanced down at the gravel. "I didn't. I had to call Mrs. Alvarez." The neighbor. Of course. They stood in silence for a beat. Then she took a breath. "Can I come in?" He held the door open. Inside, nothing had changed much. The same overstuffed chair, the same quilt on the couch. She glanced around, like someone walking through a museum of forgotten things. Her fingers brushed the mantel, stopping on the carved wooden duck he'd once let her paint when she was 6. "I didn't know," she said finally. Harold sat at the edge of the couch. Didn't know what. "What you put in the box? I thought it was just something dramatic. A guilt trip?" He said nothing, let her speak. "But then I saw it, after the wedding. Greg finally told me. And I opened the pendant, and I saw the picture inside." She swallowed hard. "It was from the cabin. Me in that ridiculous yellow life vest. You were behind me, holding the oar." He remembered the moment. He remembered the exact shutter click. He remembered how she'd squealed when the canoe tipped too far, and he steadied it, saying, "I've got you, Peanut. I've always got you." Her voice was smaller now. "I forgot that trip." He nodded. "You were young." "I forgot a lot of things," she said. "But it's not because they weren't important. It's just life moved so fast after the divorce. Mom was angry. I was confused. You stopped coming to school events. I thought maybe you didn't want to be around anymore." "I was asked not to," Harold said, his voice even. She flinched. "I know that now. I just didn't know then." They sat in the quiet. The fire popped softly, as if reacting to the weight in the air. She looked over at him. "Why didn't you reach out more?" "I did," he said, "but not always in ways you could see. I sent birthday cards, books, left messages. Your mom filtered a lot." Emily nodded slowly, like puzzle pieces were clicking into place. "And when I stopped trying," he added, "it wasn't because I stopped caring. It was because I didn't want to make things worse for you." She ran her hands along the arms of the chair, as though grounding herself. "I shouldn't have kept you out of the wedding," she said softly. "That wasn't fair." "No," he agreed. "It wasn't." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. "Greg said it would be simpler, that it would be uncomfortable having you there, that it was best to avoid drama." He said nothing. "I thought he was protecting me," she whispered. "Now, I'm not so sure." That landed somewhere deep. He watched her, saw the shift, not just in her expression, but in her posture, the rigidity of someone unlearning something long held. "I read the note you put in the box," she said. Eventually, he nodded. I was mad at first, but then I realized you weren't trying to ruin anything. You were reminding me. He didn't speak. There was nothing more to clarify, nothing to defend. She stood slowly, walked to the window, and stared out at the lake. The light hit her hair in the same way it had when she was a child running through the shallows, hands full of pebbles and frog chatter. I don't want to start over, she said. That feels fake. Agreed, he said gently. But I want to remember better, more clearly. Not just the things Mom told me, not just the version that was convenient. Harold smiled faintly. That's all I wanted. She turned to face him. I didn't bring anything. You brought yourself, he said. They spent the rest of the afternoon in quiet motion. He made sandwiches. She found an old deck of cards. They sat by the fire, playing rummy like they used to. No stakes, no pressure, just the rhythm of shared space. She didn't stay the night, but before she left, she paused at the door. I want to come back, she said. Maybe next weekend? He nodded. I'll keep the firewood stocked. And then, with a small smile that cracked through the years like sunlight through blinds, she left. The cabin was quiet again, but this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt like a page being turned. The following weekend arrived slower than expected, each day crawling like it was cautious not to disrupt something fragile. Harold didn't prepare anything elaborate, no big speech, no homemade feast. He didn't want the return of his daughter to feel like an event. He wanted it to feel like a door left open. A chair pulled out at the table. A lamp turned on in the hallway, just in case. Emily arrived Saturday afternoon, alone again. She wore a fleece pullover and jeans cuffed at the ankle, like she was unsure if the air would be warm or biting. She carried a brown paper bag of something she wouldn't let him peek at, and a smile that flickered on and off like a cautious candle. They didn't talk about the wedding. Instead, they sat outside with mugs of tea, watching a canoe drift lazily on the lake across from them. No one inside, just tethered to a nearby dock, floating slightly in the breeze. This place feels smaller than I remember, she said, sipping. You got taller, Harold replied. She smiled. I used to think the trees here were magic. They are, he said, just quieter than you remembered. The wind shifted, and she reached into the paper bag. I brought something. She pulled out a photo album, red leather cover, the edges frayed. I found it cleaning out some boxes last week. Harold took it gently, opened to the first page. Her handwriting, crooked and childish, labeled the opening photo. Me and Daddy at the zoo. The image was fuzzy, out of focus. A giraffe's head partially cropped. But her expression, grinning, mouth open wide, arms clutching a soft pretzel, was pure light. I forgot about this, he murmured. I didn't, she said. I just, buried it. They flipped through together, stopping now and then to talk about a trip, a birthday, a costume she wore for Halloween that had made her cry halfway through trick-or-treating because the mask itched. I looked so happy, she said. You were, Harold replied softly. She was quiet a moment, then said, Mom always said you didn't fight hard enough to stay. Harold inhaled slowly, not to argue, but to hold the weight of the memory properly. I didn't want you to live between battles, he said. I figured peace, even if it meant absence, was better than watching your parents tear each other apart every weekend. Emily nodded, her eyes low. I wish I'd asked more questions. You weren't supposed to be the one asking, he replied. You were a kid. They sat with that for a while, not blaming, just realizing. As the sun dipped lower, she closed the album. I've been thinking, she said, about what I want my life to feel like. Harold turned toward her. I don't want to be someone who erases, she said, or rewrites. I want to be someone who remembers, even when it's messy. He reached over, laid his hand over hers. That's all I ever hoped for. She exhaled. Greg and I are not doing well. He waited, not offering sympathy, just space. I thought he was the safer bet, she said, the guy with no sharp edges. But it turns out, quiet doesn't always mean kind. Harold nodded slowly. I've learned that lesson too. She leaned her head on his shoulder, the same way she had when she was 5 and tired from swimming too long. I'm sorry I shut you out, she whispered. He didn't say it was okay, because it hadn't been, but he did say, thank you. That night, she stayed in the old guest room, the same one with the faded green quilt and the bookshelf stacked with stories about foxes and rabbits and impossible forests. Harold made pancakes in the morning, burned the first batch like he always did. Emily laughed and called it tradition. They didn't fix everything in a weekend. There were still sharp corners, still pieces of memory that hurt too much to touch, still questions left unanswered, still names neither of them said out loud. But there was also coffee shared in silence, walks without destination, a photo album that hadn't been opened in years now resting open on the coffee table. Emily left late Sunday, just before dusk. Can I come again? She asked, car door half open. You never need to ask, Harold replied. She gave him a long look, then leaned in and kissed his cheek. I love you, she said. It wasn't a grand proclamation. It wasn't shouted through tears, but it was real. And Harold stood on the porch, watching her drive off, not with sorrow, but with something that had been missing for a very long time, hope. The house didn't feel empty when she left. It felt paused, like someone had set down a book and would be back to finish the story later. Harold didn't rush to clean up the coffee mugs or fold the blankets she'd used on the couch. He left them there, little proofs that something real had taken place. Something returned. He walked into the living room and stared at the red photo album still open on the table. His hand hovered over the page for a moment before turning it, slowly, like flipping a page of himself. There she was again, missing teeth, lopsided pigtails, holding a fishing rod twice her size. There had been so many versions of Emily and of himself. He had thought once that the older you got, the more solid your identity became. But maybe the opposite was true. Maybe the older you got, the more you realized how many versions of yourself you had to carry, and how many deserved forgiveness, not just from others, but from you. Outside, the wind stirred through the trees, soft and deliberate. It was the same sound it had always been, but tonight it felt different, like it carried something new, or maybe something old finally coming home. Harold didn't need to win anything. He didn't need apologies printed in gold or tears spilled at his doorstep. He just needed what had come back into the house that weekend, a daughter's voice that no longer carried distance, a name spoken with recognition. He closed the album gently. Sometimes, a broken connection doesn't need to be mended all at once. Sometimes, it just needs to be acknowledged, to be held, even briefly, in someone's hands again. And for Harold, that was enough.